The 2024 season is finally upon us and pre-season testing is complete. This weekend, it's showtime in Sakhir as F1 returns in Bahrain. Welcome back to the F1 Era, your weekly F1 catch-up brought to you by Nerve Podcasts and Nerve Radio. I'm Eden Hannigan.
I'm Rebecca Coulson.
And I'm Honor Dench.
And we're still in our F1 era.
Well, last week we went testing in Bahrain. Red Bull seemed to have a really, really good car. I bet you're feeling really good about that, Rebecca.
I'm feeling amazing about it, especially seeing that Max is really comfortable in the Red Bull. I mean, I always feel really bad saying this because people are so annoyed that he's dominating the field. But as a Red Bull fan and as a Max fan, you just have to be happy. I mean, hopefully he has some competition this year because even Max himself admits that he doesn't like racing when there's nobody to race. So hopefully there's a bit of competition, but he can still just get that edge.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's looking to be a scary season for anybody who is not a fan of Red Bull, to be honest. I mean, just looking at the times that they were setting during testing and the way that the car looked, it looked so balanced across the 3 days of testing that we just had in Bahrain. So it's looking to be a scary one for non-Red Bull fans, and I'm not looking forward to it because even though me being a Ferrari fan, they have made progress in comparison to last year, it's just not enough because even though Ferrari have made a big step and both drivers are a lot more comfortable, Red Bull have seemed to have taken an even bigger step and got themselves even further away from the field. I said a couple of weeks ago when we did our pre-season predictions before we even saw the testing, I thought Max wasn't going to win more than 10 races this season. I'm not so sure about that one anymore, but I don't know. Ferrari and Mercedes look okay, but Red Bull, I think they're just going to be dominant again because they just looked very, very strong through testing.
Well, they're saying that the Red Bull, that what we saw this weekend, it hadn't even scratched the surface of what it can do.
I read that.
They said
running on reduced engine power.
Yeah, I was going to say they said that Max wasn't running a full engine this week, so it's scary thoughts for everybody. And although there may be some internal issues at Red Bull, as we all know about, it's not looking very positive for anybody who is not supporting the team, the Red Bulls, or even the RB, should we mention.
Yeah, that was confusing. I'm still not used to that. I mean, scrolling down, reading the Times, you think, oh, I'm just reading I've accidentally scrolled up and reading Red Bulls again, but it's too confusing. I'm not used to it. It's going to be AlphaTauri this season for me.
Oh, definitely. I'm still living in 2008 with the Toro Rossos.
I'm still in Toro Rosso.
But I mean, they look strong as well, and they're probably benefiting from the front suspension that they seem to have taken from the sister car from last year. But Daniel Ricciardo, I believe, managed to get top 5, drag the car into top 5 on at least 2 of the testing days. So Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, or RB, or whatever we want to call them, V-Carb maybe. We'll decide as the season goes along, but they've looked fairly strong as well. So it looks like it's going to be a very well-rounded season for both Red Bull and the sister cars at RB.
I do think it's looking positive for the challenging teams, I guess, to Red Bull with Ferrari and Mercedes, because although they didn't quite beat Red Bull in testing, although Ferrari did top the charts on the final day, they've both said, so Leclerc and Sainz have said they feel much more confident in this Ferrari, and Hamilton and Russell have said that it's much nicer to drive than last year's Mercedes. So that could be something that could develop over the season, and hopefully it's a nice positive sign at some competition.
I'd like to think so, especially for Ferrari, because they're going to have a lot of potential conflict in the team this season because of the news that we already know with Lewis Hamilton joining the team and Carlos Sainz eager to prove that he should be getting a top drive in Formula 1 for 2025, maybe with a potential vacant seat at Red Bull, maybe fill in the Lewis Hamilton-shaped void at Mercedes for 2025. So it's going to be an interesting one for Ferrari. I think the car definitely looks a lot more stronger and it definitely looks a lot more reliable at the moment, but we'll have to see when it gets into race trim, because that's the thing with Ferrari for a good couple of years now. They've always looked fairly okay during testing, maybe not so much last season, but they've looked all right in testing over the last couple of years, and it's just never really truly delivered as they would have liked.
See, I've always said the opposite, but about Mercedes. Me and my dad have always said that they never quite show their full potential in testing, and I don't think all the teams do. I think they like to keep something hidden and something a little bit secret just to make the other teams underestimate them. Perhaps it's been a bit more of delusion for the last couple of years because the car's just not been good. But I do think every year I get my hopes up that it is just them hiding something and that the car is very good, because it wasn't bad in testing and it's definitely better than it was last year. So I'm sure they've got something up their sleeve.
I do feel like as an F1 team, there's only really so far you can go down before somebody realises, okay, this is how we need to improve, this is where we're missing, this is where we're lacking. So I do feel like Mercedes have definitely realised sort of where they've been going wrong the past few seasons and how they can improve. And maybe it might be a little bit too late, obviously, with the news that Lewis Hamilton has decided to leave them next year. And maybe it's a little bit too late for them to make changes to retain him as a driver. But it's definitely not too late to convince George Russell that they're the team he was desperate to be with.
Well, spite is a powerful thing. Maybe they'll make that car amazing for 2025 when Lewis leaves.
Ooh, maybe,
to
yeah.
Prove a point that he should have stayed.
He should have stayed in Boston Mason now.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes and Ferrari, they're both very much on the right track. If you're Lewis Hamilton, you're feeling quite positive because you're thinking that maybe you could leave Mercedes on a high with a couple of wins, and you're going into a team with Ferrari who look to be getting on the right track. Of course, I'm a bit hesitant because, again, we've seen that with years past where they've looked like the real deal and then ultimately they've not been able to deliver on that potential. But it's definitely interesting because we said about Ferrari topping the third and final day of testing. They could have potentially maybe topped day 2 of testing had there not been a certain issue at Sakir. If anyone wants to mention what happened that day.
Drain covers.
I just think it's silly now. I mean, how many times can we make the same mistake? Surely going into testing, we'd have gone, oh, this happened in Vegas, let's get rid of those. Or maybe on day 1 of testing, when it happened the first time, we should have got rid of them and done something about it so that it wouldn't happen the next day.
I may be mistaken here, but I believe the drain cover was actually under the curbs. And then because the drivers were pushing so much to get on the limit and on the limits of the racing line, they really were pushing it so much. And then by the sounds of it, one of the curbs maybe came loose and then the drain cover was exposed, and then over it Charles Leclerc ran, and then just behind him Lewis Hamilton followed. And then that called an end to the morning session on the first day of testing, and then there was an extra hour of the day, and again both cars looked fairly positive in the afternoon despite what had happened in the morning session. But maybe Lewis and Charles might be a little bit disappointed that because of an issue that was really out of their hands, they didn't get as much time in the car as their teammates potentially did.
Well, yeah, you mentioned it being that it was under the curb. There's so many safety concerns in Formula 1. Like, I feel like things like that should have been questioned way beforehand. I mean, drivers are going to push it to the limits. How many times do they exceed track limits? They're pushing it to that very last edge of that line. I feel like you should have seen that mistake unfolding, and that risk assessment clearly wasn't done very well.
There's many concerns made around the sausage curbs they have in Formula 1. Drivers hit them, very tiny part of their wheel hit them and they go flying somewhere in a completely different direction. So I do feel like F1 needs to take a step back and sort of think, there are many concerns we have in these tracks. Maybe they're not so suitable for the cars we have nowadays and we need to adjust things a little bit. Nobody's going to be mad if they change the curbs as long as it's going to be safe for the drivers. But definitely it's so unfortunate what happened in testing because it's not any of the drivers' fault. It's just a problem with the track and it ruined their session.
I think the worst thing as well is it's not the first time that this has happened.
100%.
Of course, we know it happened in Vegas in the first session there with Carlos Sainz and Ferrari. It happened a couple of years ago in Baku with George Russell in the Williams. And I believe the first incident that I really became aware of it was Romain Grosjean in the Haas in, I believe it was the last race in Sepang we ever had there. There was an issue with a drain cover in 2017. So this is an issue that's been going on for about 7 years now. And it's an issue that by the looks of it, Formula 1 still don't seem to have a response for. But the thing that kind of blew my mind a little bit is I saw Damon Hill, I believe, was one of them, and then there was a journalist from the race who seemed to comment and basically say that it was the driver's fault for pushing the track limits and going over the track limits, when firstly it was very clear that both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were not exceeding track limits because they had at least 2 of the tyres touching the proper track. And secondly, it's confusing to me because even if the drivers are pushing the track limits to the extremes and trying to find the limit, that's what we want to see. And if they're being prohibited from doing so by something that's completely out of their control that costs the teams thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds, dollars, euros worth of damage, then what really is the point?
This is the sport where limits are exceeded massively and they are pushed as far as they possibly can be. I don't know how they didn't see it coming.
Also, testing, if anything, is the only time in the season where it's truly forgivable to push all the track limits, because you do it in qualifying and your lap gets deleted. You do it in the race and you get a note from the stewards. Testing is your time to really see how far your car can go within the track limits and find out exactly where that limit is. So when they come to Bahrain this Friday and Saturday, they know how to not get in trouble for exceeding track limits.
Absolutely. And I mean, for that journalist to blame it on the drivers, you take this into consideration, the drivers are going at hundreds of miles an hour, they're low down, their visibility is limited as it is, they're not going to be looking for drains under the curbs.
Exactly. Well, they shouldn't even in theory be able to see them if they're hidden under the curbs.
Well, they should have faith in the race directors to have got rid of them.
Exactly. It's insane to me that this has been... Because this is the third time second, but third time a car has been damaged by it in when was Vegas? November. So if we do the maths, that's about around about then. So it's insane that so much has happened really over such a short space of time that's cost teams and drivers such an amount of experience. Because again, Vegas was a new track. Although Bahrain's not a new track for any of the drivers on the grid, it's still worth learning because you've got new machinery in front of you. You don't exactly know how it completely works. You don't know where the limit is. You don't know whether you're going to oversteer or understeer into a corner. So they really do have to kind of push that limit with the race coming this weekend. I think it's a bit disappointing that it's the second time that we're speaking about it in not a very long period of time.
Well, I think it sums up the end of silly season quite perfectly, because that is really all it is just really silly. There were some teams, though, where we spoke about those that came out quite well from testing. There are some people that haven't done amazing. I'd say Alpine, they've got a few rumours being flung around about them at the moment.
Potentially the worst car on the grid is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And now, as somebody who always predicts Alpine to be pushing for the fourth best car on the grid, that is really, really disappointing to hear. And both Alpine drivers today have said that they think that they're going on the back foot going into the season. That was echoed by both Ocon and Pierre Gasly in their media before the race this weekend. And it's astonishing to me because, Alpine, they should in theory have all of the tools, because they are the only team on the grid, I believe, that uses Renault supplied engines. So they don't have the pressures of having to supply any customer cars or having to compete with potential other midfield cars for the best packages. So it's always surprising to me when I see Alpine struggling so much. The testing just did not go well for them. And although, again, they say we can't read too much into testing, it's not looking good, especially when you've got so many of the midfield teams who are looking to be that fourth best team, and Alpine seem to have just kind of lost their way a bit in that battle.
Well, I think it's a bit disappointing as well, because don't we all have an Alpine prediction on our bingo card?
I do, yeah.
I do, yeah. Yep. Oh, I've got Ocon as well, yeah.
I've got Gasly. So.
I put Ocon top 4 and Gasly race wins, so it should be very interesting if their car isn't amazing. But I do also feel like this could be a way of the Alpine drivers being a little bit humble, because no one's going to talk to the media after testing and go, our car's amazing, we're going to beat everyone on the grid. I don't even think Max would explicitly say that his car's amazing, he's going to beat everyone. And as much as I do believe that if both drivers, say that they're going to be on the back foot, then maybe something did go a little bit wrong in testing. But you never know what position other teams are going to be in that they haven't admitted or they haven't spoken about. And they might not be as far back as they think they are in regard to other teams on the grid that haven't spoken out. I do feel like we're only going to truly know in Bahrain in the race, and maybe even in qualifying, exactly where Alpine stand. But I hope in my heart and for my predictions that it's not too low down.
100%. And to be fair, that I don't think they are the worst car on the grid, because I think that would be Haas.
Oh.
Agreed.
They've not done too well, and obviously they've had a lot of inside team issues, and that is obviously with Gunther Steiner leaving. It's come out this week that Steiner said that he found a $20 million sponsorship for the team and then proceeded to ask for some shares in the team, but Gene Haas ultimately said no, and that is what led Steiner to leave his position as team principal. Do you think maybe that has affected their car in any way? Because I know it's different positions,
Definitely. I don't really understand the dynamic between Gene Haas and Gunther Steiner. I really don't get it, because Haas is a team that, as much as you want to cover it up, they are struggling financially. And they have been for the past few years. Even before COVID, they were struggling. And now, in the economic climate they're struggling even more. And I do feel like if your team principal is saying, we need money, we need the funding, for you as, owner of the team to not provide that, it really does confuse me, because your number one priority should be the team doing really well, because the better the team does, the more money you're going to make in revenue. So it does confuse me a little bit, and it makes me feel quite bad for Gunther Steiner, because from what I've seen of him, admittedly a lot from Drive to Survive, but from what I've seen of him, it seems like he really genuinely cares about the team and getting the funding, getting the results, and nobody seems to be on his side about that.
Yeah, definitely. I also think as well, if it's quite worrying, because of course Haas are one of our 10 teams on the grid. We recently had a bid for an 11th team on the grid. Another American team in Andretti wiped off the table by the teams in Formula One. So yeah, which is really disappointing. And when you're hearing Haas struggling financially all the time and really stagnating as well, is because they don't seem to be a team that improves year upon year. They seem to be a team where they may get a random stroke of luck in qualifying. As Nico Hülkenberg, I wouldn't necessarily say it was luck, but more his experience and wanting to prove a point why he should be back in Formula One, and I guess proving some of the doubters wrong. Sometimes last year there was those moments in qualifying, but they could never really materialise for points finishes in the race. And when you hear Haas and stories like that about Haas, it's confusing to me, because we've just signed off basically vetoing Andretti coming in, and we're leaving our 10th team on the grid in a bit of financial peril. So why would you risk potentially, maybe, especially with Steiner's £20 million sponsorship not coming in, why would you risk losing the 10th team and us maybe going down to 18 cars on the grid? And although I'm not 100% sure Haas are in that much bother at the moment because of, I think, their finances, although they struggle, I think they are still meeting the requirements. But I do think it's a bit disappointing to see that and to hear what's going on behind the scenes, because it does make you wonder what the future of Haas in Formula One is.
Well, so many people have said in the comments since the article has come out and Steiner admitting what's led him to leave, and they're saying that it may be Gene Haas's name on that car, but it's Steiner that's fronts and has built the team.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's more for his personality than everything.
Yeah.
He's put his soul into that team, and it was such a shame when he resigned, because it just felt like Haas can't be the same without him. And it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it really can't be. It's a little bit like United without Ferguson. It just seems so strange. As much as like he was an amazing personality for the team, people maybe underestimated him as a negotiator, as a person, and maybe thought, oh, we can keep him on side. We don't need to give him the shares. We don't need to give him the funding. He'll just stay anyway. And obviously something ticked in him and he doesn't want to stay anymore.
Well, you put the analogy of United without Ferguson. We've seen Manchester United without Alex Ferguson over the last 10 or so years that's been. And I hope for Haas it doesn't fall into the same kind of disjointed mess that Manchester United have been without their legend and their icon that is Sir Alex Ferguson. But it really is a tough one, but we'll have to wait and see come Bahrain. I know that they also didn't particularly have a great test. It's really disappointing, and although I wasn't the biggest fan of Gunther Steiner, I think a lot of his media coverage was generally positive because of the Drive to Survive series and his big role in that. I wasn't too fond on some of his comments about Mick Schumacher over the last couple of seasons. I don't think they were really necessary, but it's weird because it's going to be a Haas team that we've not seen before. But I don't remember Haas without Gunther Steiner, and yeah. I don't know if it will feel the same without him there. It's going to be a very, very weird season for them, and if it works, then maybe Gene Haas was proven right, and if it doesn't work, then maybe Gunther Steiner made the right call and jumped before he was pushed.
Well, I think maybe you could liken it a little bit in terms of the personality way to Daniel Ricciardo, because do you remember when he left and everyone went, oh my god, the main character of Drive to Survive has just gone? And people were writing he was the funniest guy in Formula One, and I love Gunther Steiner. I think he is and was one of the funniest people in Formula One. When I go to Silverstone, there's people holding up signs saying, Steiner, will you marry me? He came out on the F1 show live and he did an interview, and at the time they were filming for that. You know that new Formula One film that's going to come out? And they Yeah, they were filming for that. There were these extra cars going around the grid and no one could identify what team it was. It wasn't even a team in the end, obviously it was for this film. But Stein was saying they should have cast him instead and he should be the face of film. And I just think he's so funny, and where his team is struggling, he does bring a bit of lightness into that dark little corner where they may not be doing so well. And potentially, if this season doesn't work out, maybe we'll see him back by summer, if not by next year. Or maybe he's got a better offer that we don't know about.
Potentially, you never know, especially with Haas being American and the American links, he could potentially have a job lined up over there. I also saw a tweet the other day, and I think it's worth mentioning, that somebody said Haas is only good on the grid for basically keeping Kevin Magnussen in a job. And I just wanted to mention that because that's basically what it feels like right now, because we're going into another season basically expecting them to roll around the back of the grid in 19th and 20th. So it's going to be an interesting season for sure, just to see whether Haas can go on without Steiner or whether they do ultimately crumble under, I guess, the lack of guidance that he used to bring and that's no longer there.
Yeah, and he's doing punditry this week in Bahrain for a broadcasting company in Germany, so maybe that's his new career line.
He has the charisma for it.
Exactly.
I'd love to see him doing it. Get him on Sky Sports, get him on the F1 show.
Those races crofty, isn't it? We should have Steiner instead.
Oh, 100%.
Now, this week we are finally going racing back in Bahrain, but Eden, can you remind us what actually happened last year?
Yeah, so as for results-wise, Max Verstappen, of course, dominated the race and really set the tone for the 2023 season. He won by 11 seconds to his teammate Sergio Perez in P2, and then Fernando Alonso finished P3 for Aston Martin, 38 seconds back from Verstappen. Charles Leclerc DNF'd Ferrari because of a technical failure, and McLaren had a real disaster class with Oscar Piastri DNFing his first ever F1 race and Lando Norris finishing 2 laps down. So that basically started the McLaren, I guess, the best comeback potentially we've ever seen from an F1 team over the course of a season.
Maybe the most enjoyable as well.
Yeah, definitely. So that was basically all that really happened in Bahrain. There was nothing major in terms of crashes as far as from what I can remember. There was also the birth of the Esteban Ocon 5-second time delay for Ocon meme.
I forgot about that.
because of that race. So that was about it, really. It was fairly uneventful pre-season opener, but it really kind of set the tone for last season. So that's what we got from Bahrain 2023. I guess we're just wondering, will it be the same this year?
Well, it's really hard to make predictions for the first race of the season because all we've seen from the cars is what's happened in testing, and like you say, we don't quite think they ever really scratched the surface of what that car can do. I feel like maybe this year there's a lot of questions that do need to be asked though, and that is whether whose career is on the line and whether Sainz and Perez are still at risk.
You know what, I've said this on every episode of this new season, but I genuinely do feel like I'm going to use the word ticking time bomb because that's all that's going through my head about Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez. And I'm going to start with Carlos Sainz because it's been in the news more recently with the news that Lewis Hamilton is going to Ferrari next year. There's still no indication really of where Sainz is going to go, and it does seem like this is going to be his season to prove himself to all the other teams on the grid. I am good at this, I can have a good shot at this, like give me a seat and I'll prove it to you. And about Sergio Perez, I mean, last year Max finished 11 seconds ahead of him. That's insane considering they're in virtually similar machinery. I'm not going to say the same because there are rumours the car's built more around Max, but similar machinery, and that Red Bull is amazing. It's a rocket ship. For Perez to be so far behind, it just screams that he's not maybe good enough for the team. So I do feel like there might be questions raised around Perez as well and at his future at Red Bull, but also on the flip side, he's a good backup helper for Max Verstappen. And I feel like as long as he keeps toeing the line, being the man to help Max Verstappen, Red Bull will keep him. But if he decides to sort of step out of line and focus on himself, then Red Bull might decide it's not worth it, we'll find somebody else.
Yeah, we definitely saw his capabilities as a number 2 driver in the cursed Abu Dhabi 2021 race, because if he'd have won that title, Max Verstappen, based on Sergio Perez's defensive driving alone, that would have possibly been the most phenomenal defensive driving I've ever seen from a race driver, but that's a complete different story. I'm curious as well because, as we mentioned, the RB car, not Red for short, the Visa Cash App Racing Ball. I will keep saying that. We need to come up with another name for this because I can't keep doing RB all season. Daniel Ricciardo had a very good showing in the pre-season testing. Again, as we mentioned time and time again, as everyone says every year, you can't judge the season based solely off testing, but if there is anything to go off, and of course the rumours are that Daniel Ricciardo will come back in to replace Sergio Perez at Red Bull eventually. If it is the case that Daniel Ricciardo races very well this weekend and Sergio Perez is so far off Max Verstappen again, I don't see a world where Daniel Ricciardo isn't driving alongside Max Verstappen at Red Bull next season. I think that would be announced at some point later on down the line. It is a chance for Perez, especially now as well, where we're getting to the time where they're starting to introduce more street race circuits, and Perez is a street racing merchant, as we should call him.
On street circuits,
so,
especially Baku.
Yes, definitely. So those are the kind of races that you'd be looking towards. I mean, obviously Jeddah's the second race of the season. If Sergio Perez goes and wins Jeddah by a fairly considerable margin, we might not be having this conversation for at least a couple more weeks after that.
Yeah, at least one episode.
I'm just not sure, because again, I looked Miami last season when he was on pole and Max was quite a way back during the race, but he goes Perez down and fought him with ease on a track where you thought Sergio Perez might actually dominate the race. And it's a tough one for Perez because he knows as well. He knows that he's under the pressure. He knows that he's got Daniel Ricciardo fighting for a seat. He knows that the Red Bull hierarchy would want to get Liam Lawson on the grid somewhere, and to do that they'll have to make a space at RB, and Yuki Tsunoda doesn't look like he's going anywhere anytime soon. The only way would be to promote one of them to the senior team. That would come not at the expense of Max Verstappen unless he decides to pull a crazy move and either retiring or going somewhere else. I don't know where he would go, but it's going to be a tough season for Perez. He knows he's got to prove it, and I'm not sure he's got it in him. I know he's got the fight, but whether the fight is enough to produce consistent showings to prove that he is worth that Red Bull seat, I'm not sure.
I like to think that Max Verstappen's best teammate was Nicholas Latifi in Abu Dhabi 2021. No, but I think Perez, he really has to prove a point now because they're just not going to let it slide for another season. Even if Red Bull aren't thinking it, the entire media is, and you can't ignore that another season. The whole of last season, Perez's career was questioned, and every time someone said prove himself, and to be honest, he rarely did. He was struggling to get into Q3 most races. It was a struggle, and sometimes if it's just one season we can overlook it, but if it carries on this season or if it carries on at least up until the summer break, he's a goner.
It is interesting as a Red Bull fan to hear Ricciardo's name being sort of thrown around in this context though, because when you think about all the drama that sort of came about after he left Red Bull, and he, not explicitly, but he kind of inferred that he didn't really want to race against Max again because the environment was toxic and the team was sort of based around Max. All of the second drivers just, in a way, got neglected. It does make me question why Ricciardo would want to come back to Red Bull. But then you consider the teams he's been with since, Renault, he didn't win anything really, and McLaren, which wasn't exactly the shining star he thought it was going to be. And he's not young, not to insult Ricciardo, but he's not young, and he is reaching towards the age of possibly retirement, and maybe he just wants to go back to a team where he can win some races, maybe be in contention for a championship, despite knowing he's probably not going to win it, at least be in contention for it. And then that way he can retire knowing that, he did prove himself and he didn't just sort of sit at the back of the grid and then drop off.
I think the reason why Ricciardo would go back to Red Bull is because he's made peace with the fact he's never going to win a world championship. Unfortunately for all the Daniel Ricciardo fans out there, that is the, I guess, sad truth that we're going to have to face, because when he did leave Red Bull in 2018, yeah, his stocks were really high, but unfortunately there was not many places he could have gone to because Mercedes weren't going to kick out Valtteri Bottas because that partnership was working brilliantly. His options were, I guess, well, Ferrari had a vacancy, but that was always going to go to Charles Leclerc if Kimi Räikkönen was to leave, and that proved to be the case. So then he had to have a gamble somewhere, and Renault looked to be a fairly solid option, but it just didn't work out, and we know the kind of environment that he had to deal with at McLaren, despite being there. Well, he is their last race winner at McLaren,
Yes.
if not including sprint races, because of course Piastri won the Qatar race last year, but proper race winner, shall we say. Daniel Ricciardo is their last one there. I think he's had to make peace with that fact, to be honest, and he knows that unless things go wrong for Max or unless Red Bull kind of drop off the pace, and he is always there because after Red Bull came off a period of dominance in 2013, he was Sebastian Vettel's teammate in 2014, and he was the one winning all the races and beating the 4-time world champion. So unless something like that happens, I think Ricciardo's made his peace with the fact that he's never going to be a world champion, and he wants to finish off his career in a team where he can win races, in a team where he knows he's valued and appreciated.
Well, that's what he said the other week, didn't he? He said he wanted to finish up his career in Red Bull. I don't know, maybe he's looking at this as a retirement plan. It feels so early now as a retirement plan when you look at the fact that Lewis and Alonso are still driving. So I don't know whether he sees this as a move to happen in the next couple of years, or...
I feel like Ricciardo is probably going to branch into other racing series. He's always said that he's been very interested in, NASCAR and other sort of racing series, and maybe even dirt biking or something. I don't know. Something out in the Australian outback, maybe, in big buggies.
Well, he has the Monaco Grand Prix, so he can go for the Triple Crown. If he wanted to enter the Indy 500 and Le Mans, he could still do that. I know Fernando Alonso is still currently missing the Indy 500, but which is not as easy as people make it out to be, by the way, because of course Alonso tried it before, albeit in a McLaren that was struggling with the Honda engines at the time. It's possible that Ricciardo could be seeing that as a potential option as well, because he does have that 2018 Monaco Grand Prix under his belt. He would be one of the, I think, the only driver to have completed it. I may be incorrect in saying this is Graham Hill. So that's something that he could potentially look to do, because I know as well he loves America. I believe he has a house in Los Angeles as well. So
he loves the Texan Grand Prix, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Loves everything American.
He really does incorporate the spirit, and that's what's great to see as well with Daniel Ricciardo. And it would be nice, even if it does come quite across as a little bit of a PR move, it would be nice to see Daniel Ricciardo in Red Bull again, because he does deserve to be in a team where he is front and centre and winning the races.
Well, I stand by the fact that Red Bull needs something to rescue them PR-wise. They're an amazing team on the track, but off the track they're really struggling. I wrote an article about a year ago calling them championship winners but PR battle losers, and that's just because they're constantly hit with cheating allegations, and now obviously you've got all the allegations being made against Christian Horner. It defaces the team and it takes away from the abilities of the drivers like Max Verstappen. He's won these championships and they're being soured by, well, right now anything he wins, whether it be this weekend or next weekend, is going to be soured by what's happening with Christian Horner. And so I think they really need to maybe cut their losses with him and bring in someone to save the day, and that's going to be someone loved by the media like Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to say I don't expect this to happen, but it also is a big fear of mine, because we don't know what's happened yet with the investigation. They've said that the investigation's complete, but we don't know the outcome of it yet. I'd like to think that we would hear something about it before the racing starts this weekend, but my biggest fear is that Red Bull do go on to win the race this weekend and he is the representative on the podium, because although, of course, these are allegations and we need to really make that well known, as a podcast that champions women in motorsports and women having their voice heard, that would be really damaging to F1 as a whole, and not just Red Bull, but F1 as a whole. So it would be a real shame if that does happen, and that is a fear of mine that it could potentially happen this weekend, because with Red Bull looking so good and no news on the investigation front. I do think Daniel Ricciardo could go in there as a potential PR move to help save the reputation, because the reputation's been on the decline since Abu Dhabi 2021, and they seem to have been in free fall since that. I hope that they can do something to rescue it, because although it's always good to potentially have a villain in Formula One, it's not great when it's a villain that just is there because they don't have the best reputation and they're doing nothing to protect that reputation or make it any better.
Well, I think the problem is that the villain is Red Bull, but it's not their drivers. I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan, and Abu Dhabi was really horrible to watch, and you would perceive the villain in that situation to be Max Verstappen, but it wasn't Max Verstappen because he didn't make the call. It was Michael Massey who was the villain, and then obviously with the over budget spending, that was Horner and that was Red Bull. So it's like you say, that it's always good to have a villain in Formula One as long as it doesn't take away from the actual abilities of their drivers who aren't the villainous ones.
Yeah, it's like Fernando Alonso is always happy to play the villain card.
Yeah.
But it's great when Fernando Alonso does it, because you know that he's doing it because he can and he finds the fun in it. Red Bull at the moment, they're doing it because they don't have a reputation. They don't have a positive reputation at all, and they need some kind of redeeming quality. Because as well, I think at the moment, you disagree with this because obviously your driver races for them and is dominating, but it's not fun when you see a team dominating and they don't have, for me personally, a single redeeming quality. Of course, the drivers are the redeeming qualities, if you will, but to me, it just doesn't seem fun.
Well, yeah, I'd say like last year's championship was the first one of Max Verstappen's that I think he truly won properly. He himself won that. Obviously, the car was great as well, but you look to the year before, they was overspending on the budget, and obviously the year before that was the Abu Dhabi controversy. It was the first championship he'd actually won without anybody tainting that.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think he deserved to win one without anyone tainting it. But it's a shame for him that a life goal has just been, people don't even consider his first championship as a real win.
Yeah,
I don't.
I'll
be honest.
It's the thing is as well, I think the disappointing thing about that, you said it's the first championship it won. I remember when we recorded the podcast episode after Qatar when he won it, I forgot he won it that weekend because he won it in the sprint race.
It will always be bitter, that 2021 championship, and it's such a shame that his first ever one is going to be soured, and it was completely wrong, and I'll never ever forgive the race directors for how they reacted. It wasn't Max's fault. He went racing the way he should have done. He wasn't in the FIA studios, and it wasn't up to him to make that call. But he will forever be affected by it. Not the same way Lewis was, but he will be affected by it in part.
Exactly, and it's all about reputations. And when it comes to the end of a Formula One career, as the one that forever grieves me of this is Sebastian Vettel. When the weekend Sebastian Vettel announced his retirement at the Hungarian Grand Prix in 2022, people were already talking about Sebastian Vettel potentially not going down as an all-time great because of how dominant the Red Bull car was. And it's a shame because when it comes to deciding some of the best drivers of all time, and there are arguments that Max Verstappen is already knocking on the door of the top 10 best Formula 1 drivers of all time, when you are having those discussions, people sometimes won't necessarily remember your driving style or your overtaking moves or race wins, but they will remember how you were acted and perceived off of the track. And with all of the drama around Red Bull right now, it can't be affecting Max positively.
As we go into this weekend, does anybody have a silly prediction, a crazy prediction that they think could come true?
I'm going to start with mine. I was going to put down that Charles Leclerc was going to win the race with a fairly wacky alternative strategy in I guess connotation with it being 7 years since the F2 sprint race in Bahrain. If you know that race, when he did the pit stop in the sprint race. Incredible. Why he's my favourite driver to this day. But I won't go for that because I don't think that will be the case. My actual prediction is that there won't be a collision going into turn 1 of the Grand Prix on Saturday.
We can only hope.
I don't know, because I feel like there are a few people who do like to play a bit of pinball going into turn 1. They do have a little bit of a reputation for that, but I'm thinking based on previous in Bahrain, I think maybe we might make it to turn 2 or turn 3 before we see some contact.
Hopefully. You won't be very happy about this, but I put that Ferrari are going to have a double DNF. Based on engine reliability issues, I'm going to say not sort of driver faults. But I do feel like, just given the reputation Ferrari have for their engine unreliability, I'm saying this more as a sort of touch wood moment. I hope it doesn't happen. So I hope in me saying it, I've jinxed it so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, because we've never got one right.
It will not surprise me in the slightest, because I remember watching the race on my laptop in my uni flat last year, shouting profanities when Charles Leclerc DNF'd with the technical issue that my entire flat could hear, so I could only apologise to them.
My flatmates hated me last year.
But yeah, no, I could honestly see it happening. I just really would like to think that we can make it more than one race without a technical gremlin disrupting any progress that's potentially been made.
Well, I'm going to go the same route as you, Rebecca, but I've gone for Perez to DNF, because I have this theory that on the first race of every season, someone that will be in a good team, I know obviously it was McLaren last year, but they eventually became a good team, will DNF. I mean, the year before it was the 2 Red Bulls.
I mean, Leclerc last year as well.
Oh, Leclerc, sorry.
I mean,
last year.
yeah, I mean, McLaren basically started their redemption arc last year, so yeah, that can also be counted because...
So yeah, maybe this will be Perez's redemption arc, or maybe it will just see him out the door. But I think he will DNF this weekend.
I hope not for him, but I can equally see it happening because it really just does depend who can get up and running this weekend. So I just hope for everyone's sake that they can have a nice, clean Bahrain race, although I think, of course, we can always expect drama going into the first weekend of a season.
Now, the dates for the race this weekend are a little different. So on the Thursday, you have practice 1 at 11:30 and practice 2 at 3.
On the Friday, the 1st of March, we have practice 3 at 12:30 p.m, with qualifying taking place at 4 p.m. in the afternoon on Friday.
And it's a little bit different because the race is on a Saturday this week. So make sure you remember it's on Saturday and not Sunday. And it starts at 3:00.
A night race to start the season. How lovely. Full circle moment for the season, starting and ending with one.
Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next Wednesday at 7 p.m. to discuss what goes down in the first race of the season. Don't forget you can reach us on our socials at the F1 Era on Instagram, TikTok, X, Spotify and YouTube.
You can also contact us, X now, under Nerve Radio, and you can email us at studio@nervemedia.org.uk.
Have a lovely weekend.